Picture this. The sterile, lifeless halls of a hospital at midnight. The only sound? The faint hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional creak of old pipes. You're alone, tasked with guarding this place, and everything feels just off. At first, it's small things, a flicker in the ICU lights, shadows where they don't belong, a distant sound you can't quite place. But then, there's a set of rules. Rules so specific, so strange, they seem like a joke. Rules like, if the cameras turn off, hide. And pray. You want to laugh it off, but something about this place feels wrong. You shake it off, logic will keep you safe. But as the hours stretch on, you realize these rules aren't just there to keep you busy, they're the only thing keeping you alive. Imagine standing at the edge of a dark hallway. You can't see what's ahead, but you feel it, someone, something, waiting for you to take one wrong step. A knock on the front door echoes through the lobby. It's a woman. Her face pale, her voice trembling. She's begging to see her husband. But the rules are clear, ignore her. Pretend she doesn't exist. Every instinct screams at you to help, but you can't. Then, you hear it, a child's laugh, soft at first, then growing louder. You turn to see a little girl sitting in the cafeteria, clutching a teddy bear. Her voice is calm, sweet even, as she looks you straight in the eye and says, "You forgot the rules." This is the story of a single night, a night that made me question everything I thought I knew about fear, sanity, and survival. If you think you're brave enough, listen closely. But remember, follow the rules. My name is Jake. I've worked the night shift as a security guard for years. It's a job I'm good at, one I've never thought twice about. Most nights are the same, quiet, predictable, and uneventful. Just me, a chair, and a bunch of screens showing empty hallways and parking lots. It's boring, sure, but I've never minded boring. Then came the offer. My boss pulled me aside one day, his tone sharper than usual, his eyes darting around like someone might overhear us. He told me there was a special job. A hospital. 3 nights. And the pay? Let's just say it was more than I'd made in a month of regular shifts. I didn't ask too many questions at first. Why would I? He seemed almost desperate for me to say yes, and I wasn't about to turn down that kind of money. But the way he looked at me as I shook his hand, it was strange. Like he wasn't relieved, not really. More like he was passing something on to me, something he didn't want to deal with himself. I told myself it didn't matter. A hospital, a few night shifts, and I'd be set for a while. Easy enough, right? But in the days leading up to the job, something started to gnaw at me. It wasn't anything obvious, just little details that didn't sit right. The way my boss avoided looking me in the eye when he gave me the start time. The pause before he said, "Good luck." The fact that no one else wanted the shift, even with that kind of pay. By the time Thursday night rolled around, I was ready to get it over with. I arrived early, wanting to make a good impression and maybe calm my nerves. The hospital was small, tucked away in the outskirts of town, and the building itself looked ancient. Bricks weathered by time, arched windows that caught the last light of the day, and a heavy wooden door that creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, everything felt still. The air had that stale, too quiet quality that made you feel like you shouldn't breathe too loudly. The receptionist greeted me with a smile, her voice warm and cheerful, but even she seemed off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was something about the way she asked my name, the way her eyes lingered a second too long, that left me uneasy. And then there was the other guard. He showed me the ropes, took me on a quick tour, but he barely said a word. He was huge, easily 6'7", and built like someone who could handle any trouble that came his way. But his silence wasn't confidence. It was the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're missing something, like there's a part of the conversation happening that you're not invited to. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and steady. He pointed to a piece of paper on the desk in the security room. "Read that," he said. "Those are your rules for the night. Follow them. No matter what." He didn't wait for me to respond. He just left, the sound of his boots fading down the hallway. And I was alone. Just me, a chair, and a piece of paper. 7 rules, written in neat, almost mechanical handwriting. 7 rules that didn't make sense. 7 rules that I would soon realize weren't just guidelines. They were the only reason I survived. I sat down in the chair, leaning back as the quiet of the security room settled around me. In front of me was the sheet of paper the other guard had pointed out. 7 rules. 7 simple sentences, each one stranger than the last. The first one seemed straightforward enough. Your shift begins at 10 p.m. Make sure you're inside the security room by that time. From 10:15 to 11, patrol the building and ensure no one is inside. If you encounter anyone, ask them to leave. I thought to myself, sure, I can handle that. Nothing too weird there. But as my eyes moved down the list, the words started to feel heavier. Rule 2. Somewhere between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m., a young woman may appear, knocking on the front door. She will ask to see her husband. Do not open the door. Do not speak to her. Pretend she isn't there. I frowned, reading it again to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding. Why would a woman come to the hospital in the middle of the night? And more importantly, why was it so important to ignore her? Rule 3. Ensure that the lights inside the intensive care unit remain on throughout your shift. If they turn off, go immediately to the ICU and turn them back on. If you hear screaming while the lights are off, run to the nearest bathroom and stay there until the screaming stops. Then, and only then, return to turn the lights back on. My hand tightened on the paper. This wasn't normal. None of this was normal. Lights going out and screaming? What was I supposed to think about that? I kept reading. Rule 4. If you see a little girl with a teddy bear in the cafeteria, sit down next to her. Do not speak unless she speaks to you. If she looks at you, leave the cafeteria and return to the security room. If she speaks to you, answer her questions until she leaves. My stomach twisted as I pictured it, a child, alone in the dead of night, holding a teddy bear, just sitting there waiting for, what? Who wrote these rules? Why were they written like this? But it was Rule 5 that made my chest tighten. At 1 a.m., go to the general ward and check on the patients. If one is sitting up in bed, ask if they're okay and do whatever they request. If they try to strike up a conversation, ignore it and walk away. There were patients? The whole building seemed abandoned during the tour. Why hadn't the other guard mentioned patients? Then came Rule 6. If it starts raining, open the front door and let people in for shelter. Make sure everyone leaves before the rain stops. If someone is missing when the rain ends, you'll see them on the cameras. Do not look directly at them. I put the paper down for a moment, my hand shaking slightly. Every rule seemed to add another layer of dread, but none of them prepared me for the last one. Rule 7. If the security cameras turn off at any time, hide immediately. Do not stay in the security room. Find a place to hide and pray for your life. They won't stop until they find you. The words sat there on the page, staring back at me. Pray for your life. This had to be some kind of joke. A messed up initiation test, maybe. But as much as I wanted to laugh it off, I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever wrote these rules wasn't kidding. I read through the list again, trying to make sense of it all. The room felt colder somehow, the silence pressing in on me. I folded the paper neatly and set it back down on the desk. The clock on the wall ticked toward 10 p.m., and I told myself it was just another night. Just a job. Just rules. But deep down, I couldn't shake the thought that something about this place wasn't right. And if the rules were real, I had no idea what I was in for. The clock hit 10:15. It was time to start my patrol. I stood from the chair, stretched my legs, and grabbed the flashlight from the desk. The hospital was quiet, too quiet. As I stepped out into the hallway, the sound of my own footsteps seemed louder than they should have been, echoing off the walls. I decided to start on the top floor and work my way down. The elevator ride felt longer than it should have, each floor ticking by with a low beep. When the doors slid open, the hallway stretched out before me, dimly lit by the flickering overhead lights. I moved room to room, shining my flashlight into every corner. Each room was the same, empty beds, untouched equipment, the faint smell of disinfectant lingering in the air. By the time I finished the top floor, I had almost convinced myself this was just another night. The second floor was no different. Empty rooms, silent corridors. The clock on my phone read 10:32 as I made my way down to the first floor. This was where the intensive care unit was located. As I stepped into the ICU, I froze. There, standing in one of the rooms, was an old man. He looked frail, his shoulders hunched, his face lined with age. For a moment, I thought he might be a patient who had wandered out of bed. But something about him didn't sit right. I remembered the first rule. If you encounter anyone, kindly ask them to leave. I approached him slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Excuse me, sir. You're not supposed to be here. I need to ask you to leave." The old man turned to look at me, his eyes cloudy but focused. He didn't say anything at first, just nodded and began shuffling toward the door. I followed him down the hallway, keeping a careful distance. As he reached the exit, he paused. Without turning around, he said 6 words that sent a chill down my spine. "Be careful of the surgeon." I stood there, watching as he disappeared into the night. His words echoed in my mind, heavy and inexplicable. I tried to shake it off. It was probably part of some elaborate test my boss had set up. But then, the lights in the ICU went out. It wasn't gradual. One moment they were on, and the next, complete darkness. My flashlight flickered as I raised it, the beam cutting through the shadows. That's when I heard it. Screaming. It wasn't distant or muffled, it was loud, raw, and filled with agony. It came from deep within the ICU, echoing off the walls and filling the corridor. My chest tightened as I remembered the rule. If the lights go out and you hear screaming, run to the nearest bathroom and stay there until the screaming stops. I didn't think twice. I turned and ran, the sound of my footsteps almost drowned out by the screams. The nearest bathroom was just down the hall. I pushed the door open, slammed it shut behind me, and locked myself in one of the stalls. I sat there, my back pressed against the cold metal door, my heart pounding in my chest. The screams continued, rising and falling, each one more desperate than the last. And then, just as suddenly as they had started, they stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. I held my breath, straining to hear any sign that it was over. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and getting closer. Each step sent a wave of dread coursing through me. A voice broke the silence, low and hoarse, but unmistakably human. "Come out, Jake." My blood turned cold. How did they know my name? The footsteps grew louder, and then the bathroom door creaked open. I saw the shadow of feet beneath the stall door, motionless for a moment before they began to move. A knock echoed through the stall, sharp and deliberate. "I know you're in there, Jake," the voice said, a strange mix of calm and desperation. "Don't make me wait." I pressed my hand over my mouth, trying to keep my breathing silent. My mind raced, but my body refused to move. Another knock. Louder this time. "You can't hide forever," the voice whispered, closer now. "I'll see you soon." And then, just as suddenly as they had come, the footsteps retreated. The bathroom door creaked shut, and I was alone again. I didn't move for what felt like hours, waiting for some sign that it was safe. When I finally unlocked the stall and stepped out, the hallway was empty. The lights in the ICU were still off. I had to follow the rules. I made my way to the ICU, my hands trembling as I flipped the lights back on. Nothing looked out of place, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I hurried back to the security room, locking the door behind me. My hands shook as I glanced at the clock. Midnight. Only 6 more hours to go. By the time the clock read 2:45 a.m., my nerves were frayed. The earlier events in the ICU still played over and over in my mind. I sat in the security room, staring at the monitors, hoping for a quiet end to the shift. The screens showed nothing out of the ordinary: empty hallways, closed doors, the same stillness I'd seen for hours. My eyelids grew heavy, and I fought to stay awake. I decided to head to the cafeteria for another cup of coffee, thinking it would help me push through the final stretch. The hallway felt colder than before, the fluorescent lights overhead flickering faintly. My footsteps echoed softly as I approached the cafeteria. When I stepped inside, I paused for a moment, glancing around. It was empty, just as it had been earlier. I walked over to the coffee machine and watched as the dark liquid poured into the cup. The sound of the drip was oddly soothing, almost enough to make me forget the tension that hung in the air. But as I turned around, cup in hand, I froze. There, at one of the tables, was a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 6 or 7. She wore a small white skirt and a pink t-shirt, her blonde hair curling just above her shoulders. In her hands, she clutched a teddy bear, one of its button eyes dangling by a thread. I hadn't heard her come in. I hadn't seen her on the cameras. She just appeared. For a moment, I stood there, unsure of what to do. Then I remembered the rule. If there's a little girl with a teddy bear in the cafeteria, sit next to her and don't say a word. If she looks at you, walk back to the security room. If she speaks to you, talk back until she leaves. I hesitated, my mind racing. Was she really just a child? Or was she something else entirely? Before I could decide, she turned her head and looked straight at me. Her eyes were wide and dark, her expression blank, and yet there was something about the way she stared that made my skin crawl. I should have followed the rule. I should have walked back to the security room. But instead, I panicked. My instincts took over, and I ran. I dropped the cup of coffee, the liquid splashing across the floor as I bolted for the door. Behind me, I heard her voice, soft, sweet, and calm. "You forgot the rules," she said. I didn't stop to look back. I didn't want to know what she would do next. I sprinted down the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the security room, I slammed the door shut and locked it. For a moment, there was silence. I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath. But then, from somewhere down the hall, I heard her voice again. "Let's play a game," she said, her tone light and playful. "Hide and seek." The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. "I'll count to 60, she continued. "And then I'll find you." Her voice echoed through the halls as she began to count. 1, 2, 3, forever with me you'll be, 4, 5, 6, in the darkness, you'll cease to exist. I glanced at the monitors, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. But before I could make out anything, the cameras shut off. The screens went black, leaving me staring at my own reflection in the empty monitors. Rule 7 flashed in my mind. If the cameras turn off, hide immediately. Do not stay in the security room. My chest tightened as I realized what I had to do. I couldn't stay there. She would find me. I grabbed the flashlight and flung the door open, stepping into the hallway. It was pitch dark, the overhead lights flickering sporadically. Her voice still echoed in the distance. 7, 8, 9, you'll never make it in time. I moved as quickly and quietly as I could, scanning for a place to hide. The nearest door was the bathroom, but something told me it wasn't safe enough. My eyes landed on the janitor's closet beneath the stairs. I pushed the door open and slipped inside, closing it softly behind me. The air was thick with the smell of cleaning supplies, and the only light came from the faint glow of my flashlight. I crouched behind a stack of boxes, trying to steady my breathing. Her voice grew closer. 30, 31, 32, ready or not, I'm coming for you. I turned off the flashlight, plunging myself into darkness. My heart pounded in my chest as I heard her footsteps in the hallway, light and deliberate. She was close now. Where are you, Jake? She called, her voice sing-song and cheerful. You can't hide forever. I pressed my hand over my mouth, trying to stifle the sound of my breathing. The footsteps stopped just outside the closet door. Are you in here? She whispered. The doorknob rattled, and I felt my stomach drop. The door didn't open. Instead, her footsteps moved away, fading into the distance. I stayed crouched in the closet, too afraid to move. Her voice echoed faintly down the hallway. Ready or not, Jake? I'll find you. I stayed in the janitor's closet longer than I should have. My breathing was shallow, my heart still racing from the encounter with the little girl. Every sound outside felt amplified, the creak of the building, the faint hum of the lights, even the sound of my own heartbeat seemed deafening in the stillness. Finally, I forced myself to step out. The hallway was dark, save for the occasional flicker of the overhead lights. I told myself I had to finish the shift, follow the rules, and make it through the night. It was the only way I could convince myself to keep going. I made my way back toward the security room, every step slow and deliberate. The air felt heavier somehow, like the building itself was pressing down on me. As I approached the ICU, I froze mid-step. There was someone standing there. At the far end of the hallway, near the ICU doors, was a man. His back was to me, his figure tall and thin, dressed in what looked like scrubs. He didn't move, didn't turn around, just stood there, perfectly still. My first instinct was to call out, but something stopped me. The way he stood, it was too rigid, too unnatural. And then, as if sensing my presence, he tilted his head slightly, just enough for me to see the side of his face. He was smiling. The smile was wide, too wide, stretching across his face in a way that made my stomach churn. In one hand, he held a scalpel, the blade catching the faint light. A patient out of bed at this hour? He said, his voice low and rasping, though there was a strange cheerfulness to it. How careless. Let's see if everything inside is still where it should be. I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing down the hallway. Behind me, his laughter rang out, sharp and erratic. It wasn't the laugh of someone amused, it was the laugh of someone who enjoyed the chase. Come back, Jake, he called after me, his tone playful and mocking. I just want to inspect your organs. The hallway stretched endlessly before me, every step feeling slower than the last. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear him, his footsteps quick and uneven, the sound of the scalpel scraping against the wall as he followed. I turned a corner and spotted the bathroom door up ahead. My first instinct was to head inside, but something told me it wouldn't be enough. The janitor's closet was just a few feet away, and I made a split-second decision. I threw open the closet door and slipped inside, shutting it behind me as quietly as I could. The air was stale, the cramped space filled with the smell of cleaning supplies. I crouched low behind a stack of boxes, my chest heaving as I tried to silence my breathing. The footsteps stopped outside the door. "Hiding, are we?" the man said, his voice muffled but clear enough to send a shiver down my spine. "That's fine. I'm very good at finding things." The doorknob rattled, and I felt my heart leap into my throat. He chuckled softly, the sound low and menacing. "You know," he continued, his tone almost conversational, "people never appreciate how delicate the human body is. One wrong cut, and everything spills out like a broken piñata." I pressed myself further into the corner, my body tense and unmoving. The door didn't open, but his voice lingered. "Maybe next time," he said, his words dripping with amusement. "I'll find you when you're not so shy." His footsteps moved away, but I didn't dare come out. I stayed crouched in the darkness, my body trembling as I listened to the faint echoes of his laughter fading down the hall. And then, the screams started. They were distant but unmistakable, sharp, pained, and filled with terror. I didn't know who, or what, was screaming, but the sound seemed to cut through the air, leaving a chill in its wake. I stayed in the closet, my mind racing with every possibility. The rules had said nothing about this, nothing about what to do if someone, or something, decided to hunt me. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The screams eventually stopped, leaving an eerie silence behind. I checked my phone, the glow of the screen the only light in the room. It was 5:20 a.m. 40 minutes. That's all I had to survive. I stayed in the closet, my hands gripping my flashlight as I waited for the minutes to crawl by. I didn't know if he was still out there, if he was waiting just beyond the door, but I couldn't bring myself to look. The clock on my phone read 5:25 a.m. 35 minutes left. I clutched it tightly, staring at the numbers as if watching them would make them move faster. I sat there in the janitor's closet, cramped and suffocating, the air thick with the smell of bleach and cleaning supplies. My legs were numb, but I didn't dare move. Not yet. The screams had stopped, but the silence was worse. It pressed down on me, heavy and absolute, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the faint sounds of the building shifting around me. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant echo, sent a jolt through my chest. Somewhere out there, they were waiting. I thought about the little girl, her eerie voice still echoing in my head. "Forever with me you'll be, 6, 7, 8. I thought about the surgeon, his laughter, his words about inspecting organs. The memory of his smile, the way it stretched too wide across his face, sent a shiver down my spine. The minutes dragged on. I checked my phone again. 5:30, just 30 more minutes. But then, faintly, I heard it. It started as a soft tapping, like someone knocking gently on a door. It was distant at first, but it grew louder, closer, echoing down the hallway just beyond the closet. "Jake," the voice called. It was the girl. Her tone was cheerful, almost sweet. "Come out. It's time to play again." I pressed myself further into the corner, my back against the cold wall. The knocking continued, accompanied by the sound of her footsteps. Light, almost playful, as they moved closer. "Are you hiding?" she asked, her voice sing-song. "That's not fair. You're supposed to let me find you." I bit down on my lip, forcing myself to stay silent. My hand gripped the flashlight tightly, though I didn't dare turn it on. And then, as suddenly as it started, the knocking stopped. The silence returned, but it didn't last long. A low chuckle broke through the stillness, deeper and raspier than the girl's voice. It came from the opposite direction, farther down the hallway. "Still hiding?" The surgeon's voice called out, filled with mock amusement. "Come now, Jake. It's almost morning." Let's make this last hour count. My breath caught in my throat. The two of them were out there, waiting, taunting, as if they knew exactly where I was but were content to let the fear sink in. I checked my phone again. 5:45, 15 minutes. Just 15 more minutes. The closet suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in around me. My legs ached from being in the same position for so long, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I stared at the door, half expecting it to burst open at any moment. "Jake," the girl's voice called again, softer this time, as if she were right outside. "Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry." I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the flashlight so tightly my knuckles turned white. The seconds crawled by, each one stretching longer than the last. Then, at 6 a.m. exactly, the sound of a door opening jolted me upright. But it wasn't the closet door. "Oh!" a man's voice exclaimed. "What are you doing in here?" I opened my eyes, blinking against the sudden flood of light as the closet door swung open. Standing there was the janitor, an older man with a kind face, looking at me with a mix of confusion and concern. "Rough night?" he asked, his tone light but sympathetic. I nodded, too shaken to speak. "It's over now," he said, stepping aside to let me out. "Come on, let's get you out of here." I stood on shaky legs, my body screaming in protest as I followed him out into the hallway. The sunlight streamed through the windows, painting the walls in warm, golden hues. The hospital looked normal. Peaceful, even. But I knew better. Without a word, I made my way to the exit, my steps quick and unsteady. The janitor didn't try to stop me. He just watched as I pushed open the heavy front door and stepped outside. The cool morning air hit my face, and for the first time all night, I felt like I could breathe again. I didn't look back as I crossed the parking lot, got into my car, and drove away. That night changed me forever. I'll never forget the surgeon's laugh. I'll never forget the girl's haunting words. And I'll never set foot in that hospital again. What would you have done in my place? Could you have followed the rules? Or would you have broken them, like I did? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And remember, some places are better left unexplored. Until next time, stay safe.